Hello and welcome to another episode of Still Processing, a 76ers podcast. I'm here, Zach Chavalella, with, of course, as always, Sam D. Giovanni, here to talk some Sixers with you guys. Sam, how you doing today, man?
Doing good. I've enjoyed what I've seen from the Summer Sixers, but I'm glad to have like a nice off day here. It feels like it's just rapid fire succession with the 3 straight days in Utah and then 3 and 4 in Vegas. But plenty to talk about. Again, nice to have a nice break tonight, but I've enjoyed what I've seen. How about you, man? How you been doing?
I've been waiting. We have an exciting couple of press conferences coming up next week. That we're really looking forward to really kind of getting into and talking to some of the players involved. The Sixers announced it: Tyrese Maxey, Paul George. So kind of just waiting for that, but at the same time, enjoying summer Sixers as I do every year. I don't hate the off night either. I'll be honest with you. A couple back to backs. I'm sure the players like it even more than I do, but it's nice to kind of digest for a little bit, think a little bit about what we've seen so far, and just really what you'd like to see out of the team ahead of their I believe their final game in the summer league. So
Not their total final game. They have one more, at least one more game that has yet to be scheduled because all the teams that don't make the playoffs have one more. But they have one more scheduled game Friday against
San Antonio.
the San Antonio.
Yeah.
And then they'll have one more in the following days, I'm sure. But so at least two.
Either way, I'm happy for the break. But speaking of the summer league, this is a stacked team, in terms of players of interest, right? So obviously, Jared McCain, first round pick, 16th overall for Philadelphia. A lot of attention with him. Ricky Council, a lot of attention there. Adem Bona refuses to be an afterthought. Jeff Downton is playing with the Summer League Sixers this year. And we can go on, and we will. But let's take it back to Utah and now in Vegas, because the majority of guys have played both. Romeo Langford, a couple other guys that only played in Utah, not in Vegas. But when we're looking at the majority of the I don't want to say heavy hitters, but the biggest names that Philadelphia fans are watching, they've played in both. Who's really stood out to you so far, both in Utah and now in Vegas?
Well, I think we were all kind of watching for this guy to stand out. So what he's done has kind of stood out for good and bad reasons. But I will say on the whole, I am more I like what I've seen from Jared McCain, also known as Jared McCann and Jared McClain and plenty of other names, I'm sure, because for some reason his name is the hardest to pronounce. Don't get that whatsoever. But he's been pretty good. Has had some, if you look at the stats, they have not been quite good, particularly some of his shooting splits. But the eye test wise, he's been as good as we probably could have hoped for. Like, he's obviously shooting the ball in a lot of different ways. He goes on. It feels like he'll make a few in a row, then maybe fade away near the end of the game, and that affects his shooting. But still, he looks good when he's shooting it. He's very confident pulling it from deep, on the move, whatever it is. With the ball in his hands, he's been really impressive. What's impressed me so far, I wrote about this the other day, was his live dribble passing, specifically with one hand. It feels like he can make quick, reads with one hand and kind of just get the, snap the ball to where it needs to be. And that's some real, point guard level skills that was kind of the main thing we want to see from him. He can create his own shot decently well, he's a guy, obviously the physical limitations are there, but the way he gets into the paint and uses his body, even got to the free throw line 7 times the other day. Even with some of the intentional fouling, that's pretty good. I've been really impressed with him. He's just a competitor too. Like, he plays hard on both ends. He does what he can. He hustles. So, obviously if you look at the stats, the shooting splits are not disastrous, I don't think, but they're also not very good. But regardless of those, everything I've seen, or most of the stuff I've seen from McCain, I've really liked.
Yeah, aside from the shooting, which is a really big aside because this is what the guy was sold on, right, was his shooting. Aside from the shooting, I've been really encouraged what I've seen from Jared McCain. I was actually talking about this last night on WIP with Jody Mack. What we have seen from McCain, which you went into a lot of, is a lot of the stuff that we weren't expecting to see. And that's what's so encouraging about it. It's the fact that, as a passer, he's shown off a strong IQ, which he told us about in his introductory press conference, but we didn't really get to see him show off that passing IQ at Duke. So that was a question mark. We've got to see yet again that defensive intensity that he brings. He's not the most talented defender in the world. He understands his limitations, but he hustles every time. He knows where to place his body. Again, IQ comes into play there as well. And then him as a finisher, I think it's been, he had a crafty right-handed finish off the, wrong hand, wrong foot. I think it was wrong everything on the left side of the basket, and he still made the shot. So it was impressive twisting and turning. Again, finishing something that wasn't really his strong suit coming out of college. So it's been kind of nice to see. I think Ricky Council's kind of been I don't want to say like de facto star, but I mean, just you look at some of the threes that he takes. You look at the reverse dunks, which are mandated in every game. Apparently, it must be written into Ricky Council's contract. But he's obviously stood out. The one guy, though, who I'm very excited to see playing at such a high level already is Adem Bona, right? So just from the get-go, ball energy, he's got a crazy long wingspan. I was excited when Philadelphia drafted him at 41 to be able to cover a guy like this, just because he provides really what you want out of a backup center. And I think that he's going to be a little bit more game ready than some people expect. And I think that's important for a team like the Sixers, where you're built around a center who's not going to play relatively close to the 82 games, right? So there are going to be minutes for Adem Bona. I got into this earlier in the season with someone who wasn't really a fan of the idea of him as a rookie getting minutes. Now, this isn't to say that he's playing like a six man through all 82. This is, probably about 15 to 20 games where he's playing legitimate backup minutes. And can he do that? I think the signs are pointing to yes, he can. Now, he's getting into a lot of foul trouble. It is the summer league. Last night was a particularly ridiculously called game, I feel like. Not that there weren't just plenty of sloppy fouls left and right. But all that being considered, the fouls, they have to get cleaned up. I'm not overly worried about the backup center. We had the same talk with Paul Reed during his tenure in Philadelphia. It has to be cleaned up, not the biggest problem in the world. But just him as a shot blocker, him as a rebounder, I'm all about it. And, to have that be the third center for Philadelphia next year, I get it. Everybody wanted a wing at 41. As a guy who just loves watching centers, I'm pretty happy with how that pick turned out for Philadelphia. What have you seen out of Adem Bona so far, Sam?
Yeah, he's been the bundle of energy that I think we all kind of thought he would be. Certainly did not back down going against some bigger guys like Walker Kessler when they played in Utah, or against Klingon the other night, which is awesome to see. The quickness to which he gets off the floor is really huge, and it's going to be one of the main reasons why I think he'll be able to serve like as a center, even though he's kind of undersized. And it feels like he's already made some really good strides in, learning the ways of verticality, learning the ways of just, jumping at the right times. It felt like there were a few times early on in the Utah Summer League where he had, he was just jumping for everything. Had some pretty gnarly falls where something could have gone wrong for him or the guy he was landing on. Obviously, he's just trying to make the play, but he was getting into foul trouble that way as well. And it looks like he's starting to clean that up a little bit, really get a feel for the professional game, even though a lot of these guys are fringe NBA players. Like, he's just getting a good feel for that and is making plays, just staying straight up, forcing misses. And it feels like the team around him, some of the lineups are generally pretty small. So even when they go with like Keve Aluma at the power forward next to him, there's not much size to like get the rebound around him. And I feel like that was one of their bigger problems yesterday against Minnesota. But still, I like what I've seen from Bona a lot. He's obviously a great lob threat. There's a lot of Paul Reed similarities with the chaotic athleticism that he brings. And so having him off the bench, as a third stringer, I feel like is like the perfect role for him coming in as a rookie. Joel will miss some nights, maybe Drummond, misses a night here or there, and he gets, some real chance to play NBA level basketball, but he's not expected to do much. So obviously he can kind of, ease into it. The Sixers don't have to worry too much about his problems, and maybe he's not even cut out to play too many minutes because although the fouling, he's starting to get a little bit better, it's going to get worse again once he starts playing real NBA level competition. But just what he brings as someone who crashes the glass, someone who is really mobile on defense and can cover a lot of ground laterally, I've been really impressed so far. And I don't know what the regular season has in store for him, obviously with Embiid and Drummond there, but I like what I've seen from him as well.
Yeah, early results looking pretty positive. Still some more work to do, obviously, but it's the summer league now. It's the time to work these things out. And throughout his rookie season, he's going to be constantly learning. And if you talk to the guy, you know that one thing he's not afraid of is work. So, pretty good feeling about Dembona so far. One guy I do want to focus on for a moment is kind of a bit more of a veteran presence with this summer league team. A guy who started as a two-way player last year, ended up getting promoted to a standard contract. Really played some significant minutes at times here and there, and now he's back with the summer league team. Jeff Doughton, right? How have you felt about what you've seen from Jeff Doughton during the summer league, both with Utah and Vegas?
I didn't know if this was too much to say, but I wrote that I think he might be getting too good for summer league. Like he is kind of getting up there in age, and he's not posting like insanely gaudy stats. Like I think Jaime Hawk is one of his first summer league games, but had like 30, 10, and 5 right off the bat. And Down's not doing that, but he really just looks to be in control of the game every single time he's out there. The way he maneuvers in the pick and roll, these quick start stop moves, it feels like he can just stop on a dime really well, and he can he can pull up from the mid range, which makes it the big man has to be honest about that. Even if he's not the biggest guy finishing on the interior, like he's still long enough and skilled enough to formulate some good shot. He can obviously pull it from three, reads the floor as a playmaker really well. It feels like he's had half their assists in the last few games or so. And obviously a lot of that is just him having the ball, but that's kind of part of the reason why is because he's the best playmaker, because he reads the floor super well. I really like what I've seen from Doughton, and I like having him here in Vegas. The original plan was he was only going to play in Utah, but having him as another guy for McCain and some of the other guys to lean on, I think has been obviously pretty good. Obviously makes them more likely to win games, and we'll see if they qualify for the playoffs or whatever it is. But yeah, I've been very impressed with him so far, and he was already someone I wanted to see the Sixers sign back to their main roster, and everything in summer league has just continued that trend.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. One conversation that I had, someone asked me if Jared McCain, was truly a point guard, and I think he's really been able to show off just that passing IQ, and I think that's part of what Nick Nurse enjoys is just that he has just decent traits. He has enough size, he has enough skill, he has a high enough IQ, and he's got a decent enough shot, and he's really, for a player who's effectively a fringe roster guy, I think that he's got a pretty well-rounded skill set, all things considered. So, he's someone who the minute that they, I guess, is it technically waiving? Is it technically whatever the case was with the contract? The minute they parted ways with Jeff Doughton, I figured that he was going to be back in some capacity. There he is with the summer league. The Sixers still have an open two-way spot. You're allowed to bring him back for a second year. We'll see if that's the route that they go. I think he's going to be back in some way, some form. And, it wouldn't surprise me if he even gets a minimum deal if the Sixers can't really get anyone that they feel is a sizable enough upgrade from Doughton in order to, fill out this roster. So it'd be nice to have somebody who has a little bit of continuity with the team. Again, you need just some guys who are a bit more capable as passers. Kyle Lowry's probably the best passer on the team right now. And then after that, it's honestly probably Joel Embiid as the best pure passer after Kyle Lowry. And Embiid has taken a lot of steps forward. That's a big problem for this team. That is a major area of opportunity. You'd like to bring in a guy who can handle the ball with a little bit of size, possibly even a bit more size than Jeff Doughton. But for right now, a 6'3" guy, that's a lot better than what they're looking at. So you got to find some in between the 7-foot passer and the 6-foot passer. A guy at 6'3" who's a little bit well-rounded, I'll take that. So, but the summer league, we're getting ready to close in at least these final 2 games. We'll see about the playoffs. Like you said, who do you feel? And let's just talk about Friday, right? Let's talk about, let's talk about this game against the Spurs. Who do you feel has to step up? As far as these summer league Sixers that we've been taking a look at. A guy like Jared McCain finding his shot, a guy like Dembona cutting down the fouls, Ricky Council putting it all together. Who's the guy that you look at and you say, will he really needs to step up in this game in order just to signal positive development.
So I think that one of the top answers is one of the main three guys of Adem Bona, Jeremy McCann, Ricky Council. But I'll go a different way, and I'm going to look for Justin Edwards to see what he can do. I think the Spurs, I don't know if I saw this, if they're going to be down Stephon Castle. Obviously, he's their main guy. They just drafted number 4 overall. Wasn't sure if I saw if he was going to be available or not for a certain point. But regardless, Edwards has been solid in spurts. It feels like he's kind of had his games. He's obviously a big guy, and that lends to him having some defensive versatility. Is what he brings on offense. He's comfortable shooting the ball. He's comfortable putting the ball on the deck here and there as kind of like a scoring option. As a guy who, particularly in transition, just lends himself really well to being an outlet guy, or even someone who can run it from time to time if it's not too crowded. One of the guys they have signed to a two-way slot, and it feels like at that wing position, they've obviously got plenty of guards. The Summer Sixers do, but it feels like he has a chance to be a particular game changer if he can really step up. David Jones as well doesn't have as much offense, I don't think. It feels like he's instinctual. He kind of knows where to be, but a lot of what he does is on defense. Again, with that IQ, with that versatility, he's just a big, strong guy. He had one game in Utah where he was really a beast on the boards, and so he kind of bring a lot of that as well coming off the bench. So I'm looking to one of those two guys. I believe those are their two-way players, and I think they're pretty good bets to bring them into Delaware. So I'm interested to see, if they can have a big game. I think whatever you get from the big three of the guards, then having one of those guys, whatever you get from Bona, I think that can really uplift the Sixers and get them into the
win. Yeah, I think Justin Edwards has done enough, showing that shooting touch to at least maintain his two-way contract status. And there's definitely a lot more he needs to show. You talked about the handle. That's always been the question, really since we saw him play at Kentucky. David Jones, I think he needs a good offensive game just to maintain that two-way contract status. There's guys who are pushing, it's guys like Kivi Aluma who really just effectively come out of nowhere to really be a standout. He didn't have his best game yesterday, but he's been very solid, and he's on the older side, but so is David Jones. You talk about a guy with a little more size, which doesn't hurt for Philadelphia, and then the other guy, Judah Mintz, I think has really kind of come on as just a real physical, downhill, just aggressive scorer, and defensively, I mean, you can say what you will about that offensive foul. Should it have been? Should it not have been? I mean, it was reviewed, and there's still deemed a foul against Minnesota. I think he's been feisty defensively, so I'm pretty happy with what I've seen from him. So just in the summer league alone, not even thinking about all the other players who Philadelphia could look at for a two-way spot, there's one open two-way spot, and there's at least two guys who could qualify for that who are not currently slotted there. So just as David Jones needs to play up to, I would say where Philadelphia would like to see him offensively, at the same time, Judah Mintz and Kivi Aluma can also play well enough just to force Philadelphia's hand. So just for those three guys, definitely it's going to be interesting to watch. But of course, we're not just talking about the Summer Sixers. Philadelphia 76ers life still churns on, even with the team in the Summer League right now. One of the long-expected moves finally happened since the last time that we had a podcast episode, and that was, of course, the signing of KJ Martin. Martin to a 2-year, $16 million deal. I believe that the cap number came out. First of all, it's a non-guarantee in the second year, and I want to say it's about. Is it 7-9 this first year? I think that's what I saw Keith Smart say, or
yes.
Keith Smith.
Yeah.
So 7-9 this year, which is good because that higher number, as opposed to, I think it was originally reported around 7,600,000. So that higher number just it further increases that cushion on the trade market a little bit for Philadelphia. So, which you hate to be talking about trading a guy as soon as you sign him, but I think that everybody's kind of aware of the situation. And KJ, I'm sure, is not too upset about getting paid, $8 million this year pretty much. And honestly, if Philadelphia can't trade him this year, doesn't find a deal, there are situations I can imagine where they would even, guarantee his deal for next year to try to move him then, or move him in the offseason as a non-guaranteed guy. So, yeah, not a bad situation for KJ, not a bad situation for the Sixers. Anything really stand out to you from that deal, or any expectations that you now have for the team around the trade deadline?
Well, it definitely helps that they kind of needed to make this sort of have a tradable salary, whether it's just one or several that they can combine, because they still have plenty of room under the second apron. Which, among all the ridiculous penalties that the second apron has, I think the inability to aggregate salaries might be one of the biggest ones that makes it the most difficult to continue building. So now the Sixers have a few, smaller mid-level contracts, and they can combine them to get someone that they think will take them over the top. And we've obviously discussed how they look right now. I think it's safe to say that their main rotation is set in place now, and now they're just going to fill the rest of the roster out with just minimums. And we talked about maybe some of the weaknesses and size that they have, or they could use just one more guy. And the ability to trade KJ combined with someone like Kelly Oubre, or just cobble up all the minimums you can to get up to a certain number, is very important. So I think it's huge, obviously, to make it a 2-year deal, and with a non-guarantee, they're giving themselves 2 shots essentially to trade for it. If there's one thing Daryl Morey is, he is ridiculously patient. I think more so than many of us out here who keep up with the Sixers. He is not afraid to play the waiting game. And so if he doesn't find someone at this trade deadline that he thinks can help the team, then I'm sure he's going to kick it to the summer and to the next trade deadline if possible. But also the fact of the matter is, a good young player got paid, and he's going to be on the Sixers for another season. KJ, I think he's a really solid player. He doesn't really fill up the box score, but he does a lot of what they need. He checks a lot of boxes as far as a big physical guy, can guard a lot of positions, gives them a vertical threat because he's really athletic. He showed a lot more willingness to shoot threes in Houston, which part of that is just someone had to do something with those bad Rockets teams, and KJ was one of the main guys, so he got some of that. I would like to see him, get some threes up again, and he shot it not too bad if memory serves, at least good enough to where he can take a wide open three if it comes to him. He doesn't have to, have the shot diet of like a Dembona, for example, where it's only inside the paint. But I like KJ a good bit as a complimentary piece. And again, whatever team trades for him, because of those upsides, because he's still pretty young, they're not going to have any qualms with bringing him onto the roster for the rest of the season. So, good business overall. I'm sure KJ knows like the high possibility of him being used in a trade, but he gets to cash out pretty nicely now. So, good business overall. And once I think January 15th, I believe, is the first date he's eligible to be traded, as our guys who sign off-season deals. So, once that comes around, there's going to be plenty of speculation. So we'll be interested to see that.
Yeah, I think you bring up a good point about KJ as a contributor as well. I think that's something that it's often lost. I know how KJ played last year. If you look at his box stats, you're not going to be overly enthralled with passion. But let's look back to his days with the Houston Rockets and even his short stint with the Clippers, right? Like this is a guy who can play. He just needs opportunity, and he needs a proper role, and he needs the right point guard in place, frankly. So with potential developments for Tyrese Maxey, with a full season or an off season with Kyle Lowry, potentially that could help, possibly even adding in a third capable passer at the guard. These are all things, and not to mention, you're moving on from a guy like Tobias Harris, who just took up a lot of minutes at power forward. You don't really have that problem, that blockade for KJ Martin. So, is he going to come out? Is he going to start for the Sixers? No, I don't think that's going to happen. Is he going to all of a sudden, find his shooting touch and become a stretch option? I don't think that's going to happen either. But there's a lot that he does defensively. There's a lot that he does as a competitor from a hustle standpoint. He's a solid rebounder. These are all things that he can do that can contribute to winning for Philadelphia. And so, I don't think that can be overlooked. And, as far as the trade market is concerned, it kind of is what it is. The January 15th is the first day that he can be aggregated in a deal. So that's really the date that matters. I believe December 15th, he can be traded by himself. I could be wrong on that. But it's effectively not worth thinking about because Philadelphia is not going to trade just KJ Martin in all likelihood. They're going to try and aggregate salaries with him. That's one of the benefits, again, of staying below that second apron. And they're going to do so they can recoup more in return, right? So guys like Jared McCain still potentially on the table to be moved if the right deal presents itself. We talk about guys who could potentially be available, some of the best players in some solid salary ranges. Now, unfortunately, a guy like Lauri Markkanen is probably not going to happen because he'll either be traded or extended by that point. In all likelihood, either way, he wouldn't be available to be traded at that point. When you look at some of the other options, a guy like a Jordan Clarkson or Dorian Finney-Smith has come up a lot. His price point would be a little tough to work with, but there's ways. He's not a guy that I think you'd look to trade McCain with, but there's certain players out there that you can make a sizable addition to this Sixers team by moving KJ Martin. And if not, it's $8 million. It's not really preventing you, from making these moves because you are still so far from the second apron. I think they're about $13 million from the second apron. Now that campaign's cap hold does not count against the team any longer. They still have, it's technically 3 more spots to fill, but they're probably going to go into the season with 14 guys. So at that point, you're talking about 2 more veteran minimum contracts. You have a sizable gap between yourself and the second apron. So there's not really anything to worry about on the financial side for Philadelphia at this point in time. And like we said, you have a guy who actually can contribute, contrary to maybe what some people are expecting out of KJ Martin. Is he worth $8 million compared to what other players have been paid this offseason? As a talent, probably not, but that's not some egregious number that you're paying. And on top of that, you're paying him that for a reason. And he also can contribute for the Sixers next season. So it's all the way around. There's nothing not to like about this deal, if you ask me. But we've talked a lot, kind of danced around some of the veteran minimum options that the Sixers could do to kind of fill out this roster. The first guy that I want to call attention to real quick is we're going to go through just a few different names here. Obviously, Marcus Morris feels like a strong possibility. I don't want to say an inevitability at this point. It kind of feels like that at sometimes. He's definitely interested in coming back. It seems like Philadelphia might be interested in bringing him back. Nick Nurse loved him as a leader. He can stretch the floor. He can play small ball 5, weak defensively, but still he's capable at it. Before we kind of move on to kind of picking and choosing some of our top options, what do you think about the idea of Marcus Morris coming back soon?
I think it would be fine. He doesn't. There's not much to get excited about for minimum guys anyway. He obviously brings a lot as a tough shot maker and as a scorer. And I think, again, the Philly connection is obviously there. So he would be fine to have, but he's not someone that I would look at and be like, oh, interesting. Like, he's a guy that, like you said, part of it is the inevitability. I feel like there's been plenty of rumors about, linking him to the Sixers. Makes a ton of sense. If I had to make a prediction, I would bet that he's one of the last few minimum guys. I've actually been going back and forth on if they're going to go into the season with 14 guys like they did a little while ago, or if they're going to sign another guy maybe to like a non-guaranteed minimum, if they can do that. I think that's what Danny Green's was last year, to like have another guy they can trade but also get rid of soon. Although I'm not sure exactly how many players you can trade, if that even matters. But regardless, yeah, Morris would be a fine guy to have at the back of the rotation, a guy to come in, space the floor. That would be like, I don't want to let him do too much, cooking on offense. I feel like when the ball sticks, doesn't work particularly as well. And because he's getting up there in age, his defense, like, obviously he's going to try. He's a tough guy, but his defense is just not what it used to be. So if he's back and he's a guy who only plays when guys are injured, I'm perfectly fine with that as well. It's obviously fun to see a Philly guy in Philly. And like I said, he's got that, shooting ability still at his age. So he'd be cool.
So we're going to keep it Philly. I just got another name that I want to bring up to you real quick because I've seen it floated around a little bit, not in reporting spaces, not by anyone with any relation to the front office, but the name Lamar Stevens came up, while we're talking about Philly power forwards. Now, Lamar, he's bounced around a little bit since being in the league. He's played for Memphis, he's played for Cleveland, he's played for Boston. And the consistency with him is that he's been a strong defender. He's incredibly well liked in the locker room. And he will not shoot whatever you want to qualify it as there. How do you feel about the idea of potentially adding, well, let's call it a defensive specialist on a minimum deal, maybe even a guy who in this case is a little bit younger. And then I'll tail in that just with, we'll talk about the local guy first, but then kind of move off of that after the fact and bring up a similar type of player in Chuma Okeke. So what do you think about Lamar Stevens there first?
Chuma was one of the guys, when you asked me before we started, he was one of the guys that popped into my mind first as a potential option. So I like your thinking. And yeah, Lamar's the type of guy that I think would benefit the Sixers more. Again, these roster spots, it's very unlikely that they're going to come into major importance. Hopefully the Sixers don't have a season like last year where so many guys are dealing with injuries that keeps them out for months on end. But I think if you do have to turn to those guys, it's much more beneficial to have a younger, more athletic guy who can bring some value on defense as a hustle guy. I understand the easy fit that Morris has as a shooter. He can space the floor. He still shoots well from three. Lamar Stevens does not. Chuma Okeke does not. Another guy in my mind who's kind of similar to them, a little bit bigger, JT Thor, does not. Those guys aren't real shooters, but I just like the idea of having a guy like that who, if you turn someone off the bench, it's, hey, go spend all your energy as hard as you can on defense, get every rebound that you can, be a connective piece on offense, and just kind of fit in that way. I think having those guys in the long run could be more beneficial. Obviously, Stevens has the Philadelphia connection as well. He's a very solid player, and, having a guy who can defend multiple positions, similar kind of like what KJ Martin can do. Obviously, the non-shooting aspect is kind of tough to overcome, but I don't think having one super bad shooter is all that problematic, especially when you're going to have great shooting from the backcourt with McCain, with Kyle Lowry, with Eric Gordon, whoever's out there. Like, there still should be a mix of shooting to where a guy who's not like a non-shooter, but not a great shooter, some of these guys, obviously. So I think having a guy like Stevens would make plenty of sense. And I mean, shoot, you could sign Morris and another one of these guys, so you could have the best of both worlds anyway. But I do think it would benefit the Sixers a lot to have a guy who, if they need to turn to someone deep off the bench, it's not someone who they're going to expect to run the offense, going to, make plays, make a bunch of shots. It's just play your heart out. And I feel like a guy like Stevens, Okeke, Thor, plenty of other guys, I like that archetype as well. And I think the Sixers, with at least two of the spots they do need to sign before, possibly keeping a spot open for flexibility, they should definitely try to get one of those guys.
Yeah, I don't hate that type of just concept, I guess, in a rough sense. One guy who, he's a bit more seasoned than those guys, but kind of really fits that same profile, right? You're talking about kind of a tweener forward, defensive minded, not really a whole lot in terms of shooting. Also has a Philadelphia tie like Marcus Morris and Lamar Stevens, just not in the where's he from sense, but just where has he been. Thaddeus Young is somehow still contributing across the league. He's a guy who he's kind of slid a little bit more into that small ball five, but the mid-range shot's still there. The three-point shot was never really there, but the mid-range is still there. Defensive intensity is still there. The length's still there. The burst isn't. Is he a guy that you would possibly look at and say, hey, maybe this is the homecoming opportunity for Thaddeus Young?
I mean, look, anytime you can sign a guy who's in the company of guys like LeBron James, Michael Jordan, Magic Johnson, and Larry Bird with his production, I mean, you got to go get a guy. Yeah, that's an interesting name, and someone who I'd kind of skimmed as I was looking for, potential minimum options. And I think he actually might make a lot of sense playing next to Adem Bona, sort of Drummond as well. I mean, if, Thaddeus has a little bit of shooting touch, but it's not all the way out to the three-point line. It's probably best for him to be sort of the center of a lineup, or at least the slowest guy in the court for the Sixers, and put as much energy and athleticism as you can around them. And that's where Bona would come in. And so having them as the backup big spot, I think that would be pretty interesting. Again, it's a minimum spot, so while it would be nice to, it's a little idealistic to think that the Sixers are going to turn into like a young, unproven guy who hasn't been a part of really good teams, which we've kind of been talking about specifically with Okiki and JT Thor, and think that, okay, yeah, we'll bring these guys if they're needed in a pinch. That's really kind of idealistic thinking. A guy like that, young, makes a lot more sense. He's been around in the league for so long, played on plenty of teams. Obviously, the Sixers are one of them. So he does make sense. For him to be kind of limited position-wise, I would assume he's probably down the list of guys the Sixers are considering, if I just had to make a guess. But I would be intrigued by another Thad reunion or a Thad reunion.
All right, so we've gone over effectively all of the copycat power forwards that I think that we can. Who else stands out to you as a potential veteran minimum guy that Philadelphia could target? Is there someone, I don't want to say a darling, in your eyes, but someone who you say, okay, this makes sense. This would be a great fit. Let's see if he'll come to Philadelphia on a minimum deal.
So I think position-wise, it would help them to get another guard kind of defensive specialist. I think a lot of people in Sixers land were looking at Chris Dunn as a really nice option to get as a potential starter. Obviously, he is in the process apparently of going to the Clippers. There's a weird thing going on where that hasn't been announced yet, so it's unclear what's going on.
One of these days, it will happen.
Right?
They have to move Russell Westbrook, I guess, but it's going to happen eventually.
Right. And then when the Sixers went and got Caleb Martin, that he kind of fills in as like that defensive guy, that extra guy to have in the backcourt, front court, wherever. But I do wonder if potentially another reunion, if this guy is okay being either a third stringer or someone who's competing with Lowry and McCain for minutes, or at least at one of the guard spots. Markelle Fultz, one of the options, and Dennis Smith Jr. is another. These two guys have some athletic burst to them, obviously. Failed draft picks, but have kind of reworked their games into being sort of like Chris Dunn, guys who hang their hat on defense, who will make plays, who will use whatever athleticism they can to score on the inside. Obviously, the shooting is a big question, and it feels like they each had much better seasons or much more intriguing seasons last 2 seasons ago than they did last year. Maybe that's just some random hiccup thing, but I think having someone like that deeper in the guard rotation makes sense. Especially at this point, it's probably going to be harder for them to find a place where they can play. So perhaps if they're willing to come back to Philly, specifically Markelle coming back would be very interesting. So I think one of those two guys would make a lot of sense as one of the last few roster spots.
Absolutely. I would love to see Markelle back in Philly, to be honest with you. And I think there's a lot of Philly, fans who would feel kind of similar, as far as the controversial athletes in Sixers history since the process began. Markelle Fultz is shockingly, and if you've been through the ride, it's not that shockingly, but on the surface level, shockingly not as controversial or disliked by Sixers fans. Sixers fans championed him a lot during his time here in Philadelphia. Was everything always easy? No, there's a lot of conversation about this, that, the other, and it got ugly at sometimes, but night and day, I would say, between that experience and what Ben Simmons went through. And not that Ben Simmons didn't cause what he went through, but Ben Simmons came out the other side, at least saying that he'd want to come back to Philadelphia. So I can't see any reason why Markelle wouldn't want to, unless he thinks he still has a bigger deal out there, which based on his play, you could argue, but this market looks incredibly tough. CJ McCollum did the middle class of the NBA no favors with his CBA.
None. Killed him.
So it's tough to see. I mean, Gary Trent Jr. just took a minimum deal with the Milwaukee Bucks. It's tough to see. And I know the report that he turned down more money elsewhere. I don't know about that. But that's what happened, is that you had a guy who outplayed that position significantly, settling for the minimum. We saw Malik Beasley do that last year as well. Yeah, I just I feel like there's an opportunity here to land one of these higher name guys. I think that Tyus Jones is probably aiming a little too high. I mean, that's a guy who, I feel I would be shocked if he took a minimum deal. But that being said, I would love to have him in Philadelphia. I think he'd be a fantastic contributor with the Sixers. But a guy like Markelle Fultz feels a little bit more realistic, right? And a guy like Dennis Smith Jr. is certainly realistic. when we're talking about kind of like defensive minded guards, with a little bit of ball handling, the other name that kind of sticks out to me, and this is the first of two names I'm going to bring up, they're both Rich Paul clients, which is really important considering how that relationship has been healed with how the Sixers have handled the Tyrese Maxey situation, at least now that he's paid. But the first guy is Talen Horton-Tucker, right? Unlimited potential, it seemed like, to start, at least if you ask a Laker fan. I think everyone else was a little bit lower on him than most Laker fans. But he's been a solid perimeter defender through his career. There's not a three-point shot really there. And that's the same thing that you're talking about with Markelle Fultz. There is a bit of a mid-range game from Talen Horton-Tucker, right? A bit of athleticism, 6'4", solid size. And when you're talking about, picking and choosing guys who can fit, again, we're kind of at the bottom of the barrel in terms of talking about veteran minimum guys. That being said, I think that there is a contributor in Talen Horton-Tucker, and I think that he could play a serviceable role. He's got a killer wingspan, again, just defensive IQ, intensity, somebody who could guard on the perimeter successfully for Philadelphia. The other Rich Paul client, and this is a local kid, what about bringing in Lonnie Walker? I know he's not the defender that we've been talking about with this, but it'd be nice to get some athleticism at the guard spot as well. He has at least more size than Tyrese Maxey, Kyle Lowry, and he has a better shot than, as inconsistent as it is, a better shot than talking about Markelle Fultz, even Dennis Smith Jr., and then, of course, also as well, Talen Horton-Tucker. So Lonnie Walker, how do you feel about bringing it? I think he's from Reading. How do you feel about bringing the Reading kid?
The most famous person from Reading, Pennsylvania on planet Earth, Lonnie Walker.
Yes, by far.
He's another guy too with Tyus Jones that I was looking at options, but I kind of skipped over because they'll probably want a bigger role and to make more money. At this point, who knows what's in store? I'm sure it's tough. So yeah, having Lonnie, and he's someone whose 3-point shot is much more proven. It proved as his career has gone on, he has greatly increased his volume from when he was a youngin with the Spurs. And last year he shot 38% on 4.7 attempts from three with Brooklyn. So yeah, he would be a nice guy to have as sort of a different, change of pace scorer off the bench. Talen Horton-Tucker, I'm less enthused by, but I kind of see the vision of kind of a funky guy who has shot pretty well from the free throw line. So you might want it like 80% good. So, maybe there's some reason to think maybe that there is a spot up 3-point shot there. Call this kind of the Kelly Oubre effect, for lack of a better word. But guys at this point in the offseason, they might look like they're suited best for one role, but because they're coming into a team that's more established where they might not get playing time, they kind of have to play ball with the team and do more of the dirty work, change their game. They're more likely to change their game in the way that their new team might really want them to, which is what Kelly did last year, and it worked out really well for him. So I think having, Lonnie, he's not a super big wing, but he's someone who could obviously fit as like a 2-3, maybe play some 3 here and there. Obviously, he's pretty athletic, from here. And it's not just like the athleticism that's intriguing. Again, it's the 3-point shooting that makes him an instant fit with a lot of other guys on the roster. So I'd be very intrigued by him, but I still, he did, the Nets obviously didn't do anything last year. So maybe his great season there isn't has held in a high regard by teams as it is by the rest of us. But I would be very intrigued by him for sure. Amongst all the players who are left, he's probably the best they can do. So I would be intrigued.
So just to wrap up today, the one thing that we haven't really talked about in terms of guys that, can come in on the vet minimum, how about some shooters? There are still a couple shooters that are still out there. I'm going to throw 3 names at you. Just let me know who you think is the ideal option there, factoring in, considering, if you would think that they would take the minimum with Philadelphia, right? So this is a dirty list of names, but that's, again, where we are in the offseason. So we're looking at Luke Kennard, Evan Fournier, and former Sixer Landry Shamet.
Okay. So these are guys who, at least Fournier has kind of the size that we were looking at with Tucker and Walker, but he's getting up there in age, and I don't know what he's a guy that likes to cook a little bit. Obviously, they all kind of do, but I would be wary of, bringing in someone older. I think betting on someone to have more athletic upside than him, or even like Shamet or Kennard. I think, like, if I had to rank some of the guys we're saying, I would clearly already go with Lonnie Walker ahead of them. Obviously, the shooting helps a lot for sure. But I think if you're looking for a shooter, you want to find a guy who has as much positional versatility. Again, it's a lot to ask out of a minimum guy who's signing late in the offseason, but you do want to make the most of your roster spots. And the last three you just named, I'm not as confident that they can scale down or up a position, at least the way that I'm comfortable with Lonnie Walker scaling down. So not bad option. It's never a bad thing to have a lot of shooting, but I feel like especially because they made the Eric Gordon signing so early in the offseason, he's a guy that is pegged for big time minutes. And I think if you have to play him and Lonnie Walker together, there's not as much of an overlap as there would be with Fournier or Kennard or the third guy whose name I'm already forgetting. So I would pass on these guys.
So for me, and again, I do like Lonnie Walker. I do like Markelle Fultz, who we talked about. And I think, a guy like Fultz, that level of free agent, if you can get him on the minimum, that's the clear winner. Talking about these three shooters, I love the story and idea of Landry Shamet coming back. I love the idea of Evan Fournier, coming and being this year's Frenchman, to talk with Joel Embiid now that Nico Batum's gone. I love that story as well. To me, Luke Kennard is such a better player at literally just that one skill set. And Philadelphia, I think, needs that sharpshooter, that guy who can be what Buddy Hield was supposed to be. And looking at the offseason options, closest guy to that for me is Luke Kennard, right? So he's not going to do anything else for your team but shoot. And that's fine. We're talking about a specific role that Philadelphia needs. You kind of look at the depth chart where they're at so far. Starting lineup, all guys who are capable at shooting. Kelly Oubre, now that he doesn't have to play up effectively and be a top 3 option on this team, maybe he takes or enjoys a better selection of shots and his percentage goes up a little bit, but you can't really rely on him to be anything close to a knockdown shooter. Caleb Martin, the same thing during the regular season. Once the playoffs happen, he's Ray Allen. But before that, it's a long way to go. Paul George, Tyrese Maxey, that's great. Joel Embiid, reliable three-point shooter. And then you start looking at the bench and you start looking at Ricky Council, who has impressed and surprised as a three-point shooter. Certainly not a knockdown guy. Kyle Lowry, who has begun to kind of fade a little bit as a shooter. Andre Drummond, Adem Bona, Jared McCain, sure, but we don't know what the future holds for McCain. And right now, we don't know if his shot's going to translate. It seems like it. It certainly seems like it, but it'd be nice to not put that pressure on him to be literally the only shooter off the bench for Philadelphia. So, we're talking about Eric Gordon's there, but Eric Gordon, again, I'll say, I was wrong to say McCain being the only shooter, but we would want more than McCain and Gordon, I feel like. And with Gordon, you have a guy who can kind of play a little bit of that combo guard at times. I want more shooting. I need more shooting around Joel Embiid. I need guys who you can just dump the ball off to, whether it's Maxey, Paul George, Joel Embiid, whoever. Just give me more competent shooters. And so if that's the angle that you're going with, that's Luke Kennard, if you ask me. Like, I need a guy who is beyond solid, even if it's at one core skill. So be that shooting, be that defense, be that playmaking, be that athleticism. I would like a guy who can star in at least one of those 4 major categories for Philadelphia, which is why a guy like Markelle Fultz is great. A guy like Luke Kennard is great for Philadelphia. Tyus Jones obviously would be fantastic if he would take that minimum deal, which I don't know that he would. And even a guy like Lonnie Walker, who is one of the best remaining athletes on the open market right now. So if you can get me one of those 4 skills that a guy can do consistently and at an above average level, then I'm happy. But that's where Luke Kennard comes in for me.
This is maybe I'm thinking too much into if you sign a guy who expects to play, then maybe it throws some stuff out of whack off the bench. Maybe I'm putting too much stock into that because I agree. Like Luke Kennard, he's shooting in the mid 40% from 3. Like that's fantastic. I just, and again, maybe at this point in the offseason when you sign a guy like that who has played a lot, the expectation is, okay, I'm coming here, but I'm going to have to fight my way up for minutes. So I don't disagree at all with like having a really good shooter off the bench, even if there is like positional overlap with Lowry, McCain, Gordon. I guess for some reason I find that, there's almost sort of like some positional balance that could be restored, but also at this point in the summer, I guess just kind of contradict myself. You just kind of want as much whatever you can get. If you can get a guy like Kennard and he's okay, fighting an uphill battle to get minutes, or Shamet coming back, or whoever, then I think it would be beneficial for sure. I guess just in my head, knowing that these guys have played a lot in other teams, that they're still probably holding out for stuff. And I guess that's kind of the expectation I'm working with, even if it's not necessarily what would happen. That's kind of, I guess, where my apprehension comes from.
We've seen stuff kind of similar to that throughout the season, right? So a big reason, reportedly, that players have not really considered the Lakers is the lack of a promise to start. That was something that came out about Klay Thompson, and I believe Gary Trent Jr. That was he was the other player mentioned in that report. And yeah, that is a potential struggle with some of these players. A guy like Luke Kennard, I think you can play him at the Fugazi 3, and defensively, you're in serious trouble. But offensively, you're looking at a guy who can play alongside Eric Gordon, can play alongside, or Kelly Oubre, for instance, Paul George, if you want to move him up to the 2. Caleb Martin's played a lot at the 2. A lot of positional versatility in that starting lineup. So you can go on and on naming guys there. But the other thing that I think about, just thinking about the list of names that we've named quite a few names. We've talked about some stretch options and some defensive options, basically at, the guard wing spot and at effectively the power forward spot. So as long as you can mix and match, I think you have a healthy team dynamic, right? So if you get a shooter at the guard wing, get one of those defensive-minded power forwards that we talked about. If you bring back Marcus Morris and you get a guy who can stretch the floor a little bit, opt for defense on the perimeter there with a guy like Markelle Fultz, Talen Horton-Tucker, or even Dennis Smith Jr. The only hang-up I have on Dennis Smith Jr. is that he's kind of more like he's combo guardish, but I don't know about him playing effectively as like the third point guard on the depth chart. That's the only thing, you talk about role that I do wonder there. Whereas a guy like Markelle Fultz, you can play him at the 2 effectively. And he can be a ball handling 2. And he's a great fit alongside Tyrese Maxey, might I add. So that's in his hat for his benefits there. But just a lot of different options. Daryl Morey and the rest of the front office, they're going to be pouring through these guys until those decisions are finally made. For now, there's still some games to be played in the Summer League. That's going to be the primary focus for the moment. And then next week, we're going to hear a little bit from what Paul George and Tyrese Maxey has to say. So that's still on the horizon for the team there. But for now, thank you so much for watching. Thank you for listening. I've been Zach Chavalella here with, as always, my guy, Sam Giovanni. And this has been the latest episode of Still Processing, the 76ers podcast.